Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today I'd like to talk about why ankle stiffness can be the hidden root cause of most ankle sprains, and continuing on from that, why ankle stiffness is often the deciding factor that creates recurring ankle sprains. So if you sprain your ankle once, we know that you're 3, 4, 6 times more likely to have another one down the track. And we often put this down to something to this idea that because you've overstretched and damaged the ligaments the first time, that those ligaments are now loose. And if you keep spraining your ankle, we live with this idea that it's because you have loose ankles and they just keep going and going and going. So clinically, what I find personally is this may not necessarily be the case, or at least the role of loose ankles is a little bit different to what we think it is. We're sort of looking at it potentially in the wrong way without sort of being able to take in the broader context of what's going on into the conversation. So one of the things that I find a lot is that a stiff ankle, so a joint that is stiff, we're not necessarily talking about muscular tightness, but an actual ankle joint, that talocrural joint, the joint itself and the capsule around that joint becomes stiff. And the reason why this is so important with ankle sprains, beyond the rolling incident that happens, is the stiffer your ankle is, the less movement options you have, the less give you have in the joint, in the system, to buffer a rolled ankle. So we've all had this either ourselves or we know someone who's done this, where someone's just walking along, they put their foot in a pothole or they step off a step and they roll their ankle. What this essentially does, you obviously need that rolling incident to create the injury. But what I want to promote underneath this is there almost has to be some level of stiffness or dysfunction present before that moment that doesn't tolerate that situation. So what I find personally is, as someone who used to have really stiff ankles and who's worked really hard on my ankle mobility, whose ankles are now freer, what I've realized is you're allowed to roll your ankle and not hurt yourself. If you have the slightest roll and you hurt yourself, then that tells us that going into that particular motion, you were subpar beforehand, and you may not have been sore, you may not have had any injuries previously, but there's every chance that the joint isn't functioning normally or doesn't have the capacity to function normally, which means it can't buffer abnormal scenarios. And the interesting thing about most ankle rolls is a lot of those aren't necessarily extreme rolls. They just test out the limits of your mobility. There's obviously nasty ones where someone jumps and lands and rolls as they land, or someone rolls off a step and all their weight goes through their foot, and it's very easy to come away with a broken ankle as well as torn or ruptured ligaments. But again, the point I want to promote here is that the quality of your ankle function before that often determines how you go after that. So if you have normal mobility in your ankle, so the joint isn't stiff, it functions really well, then you've got a greater capacity to buffer a bad situation. And of course, some situations can be so bad that they're going to surpass anyone's ability to tolerate that. That's understandable. That's not necessarily what we're talking about here, because the overwhelming majority of people who roll their ankles don't necessarily do it in any heroic fashion. It's just a simple roll. They challenge the ligaments, they injure them, and then they're out for 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, depending on how bad that sprain is. So I guess the interesting concept that I want to promote today is that if that ankle joint is stiff and it robs you of your capacity to go with that movement, if the joint itself can't give in the moment, it's going to look for the next available opportunity to do that. And bone and a stiff joint is much tougher and offers much more resistance than soft tissue like ligaments. So your body is much more likely to stop when it gets to that sort of bony end or that stiff end, and it's going to bust through those ligaments more likely, because that's the structure that's most likely to give. So what we see a lot, and this is a huge part of my rehab, is we highly underrate the ability to mobilize a stiff ankle to give that person back their movement options so that they don't have to use their ligaments when it gets to that point. Obviously, ligaments are there to stabilize your joint, but in the purpose of a rolled ankle, you want to make sure that you've got enough mobility in the joint to go with that movement before you get to the challenging those ligaments. And again, there's situations where it doesn't matter how good you are, you're possibly going to damage your tissue regardless. But we're talking maybe 5% of cases, 10% of cases, 15% of cases, not 100% of cases like we tend to think it is. So what we'll get to in a second is I want to go through an exercise that we've gone through before It's a really great way to improve the mobility of your ankle joint, give you back some breathing room in your ankle, take some of the attention away from those ligaments so that when you're doing your daily activities, you're allowed to roll your ankle and not injure or damage those ligaments. You've got the ability to buffer that and just move on. Now, as a quick story for me, back home in Australia, probably 6 years ago now, I was working really hard on my ankle mobility, and I was tiling some steps. What happened was I walked and I rolled my ankle off the step, and if that had been me 4 or 5 years prior, there's every chance that there was enough force there that I would have obviously damaged the ligaments, but I could have broken my ankle, I could have done some serious damage there that could still plague me today based on the consequences of that action. But because I've been working a lot of my ankle flexibility, all that happened was I rolled my ankle and my leg and my body went with it. So I definitely scared myself. It was a little bit of a shock because of how nasty it was. I got a tiny little bit of swelling for maybe half an hour or so, but essentially I was fine. So I walked away from that because my ankle was far more mobile than a previous version of myself. And if that previous version of myself with stiffer ankles had been in that situation, I wouldn't have had that capacity to give and to go with that movement and potentially save my ankle. So what I want to go through today is I want to give you the capacity to improve the function of your ankle by taking away some of that stiffness, take away that handbrake, so that if you are someone who's prone to rolling your ankles and spraining your ankles, you can start to claw back that function and go from someone who has weak ankles to someone who used to have a problem with their ankles and now you're fine. So how that looks basically, as I said, we've gone through this before, but the good old power band is amazing for this. So we're going to do the banded ankle stretch. So hopefully you can see this on camera, but all it basically is hooking the band above your ankle bone and stretching that band out as far as you feel comfortable without something following you. And all we need you to do is just bend that back ankle. And what we're looking for is we're looking for some pressure or some tension down the back of the ankle. You might feel it in your Achilles a little bit, but we're looking for a deeper sensation. It might not even be a stretch, but we're looking for a pressure feeling. And again, we want that knee to rotate out. So how that looks from the front, again, is we're not coming forwards and letting the knee cave in, because as soon as you run into that ankle stiffness, the knee's always going to want to come in to find more range. So we want to almost go into that position and out to really stretch that stiff range of motion in this sort of quarter of your sort of range. So we want to make sure that we've got a lot of tension on the band. Obviously this is going to follow me if I pull it out, but the idea is that we want to stay here for 30 seconds, stay here for 2 minutes, stay here for long enough so that you feel like you start to reclaim some of that mobility. And what we can do once you've done that is we can do it in different directions. So you can turn around and have the band pulling this way, do the same thing to stretch the inside of the joint. You can turn around and have the band pulling that way again to stretch the outside of the joint a little bit more. So, but the point of, I guess, this video is just to say that if you are someone who A, wants to avoid an ankle sprain, or B, is recovering from an ankle sprain / C, keeps getting ankle sprains, I really want to promote this idea of moving away from this idea that you have weak ankles, and you certainly need to work on your strength, your balance, the conditioning around that area. It's going to be some muscular tightness, whether it's your calf or some of the muscles in your foot. But the overarching idea that I see a lot clinically is that if your ankle is stiff, then your body doesn't have too many options when you roll your ankle again. So, and we know again from previous videos, which I'll link up here, is that your balance improves when your ankle is looser. So that when the ankle joint is less stiff, again, you have more movement options and a better ability to stabilize and buffer challenges and changes in your balance. So we also know that your proprioception, your ability to know what's going on at the joint without looking at it, that joint sense perception improves with a looser ankle. It's worse when your ankle is stiff. So all these things together conspire to leave you with an ankle joint that's prone to injury. So it doesn't guarantee that you will have an injury because nothing's ever guaranteed, but hindsight's really clear that if you, I guess the looser your ankles are from a joint perspective, not necessarily from a ligament perspective, then the risk of injury, the risk of re-injury is very, very high. But more importantly, what we find clinically is the looser you get those ankle joints, then not only do you sort of have less chance of becoming injured, but when you have that moment where you roll your ankle, as I've said before, you can just buffer that better. So again, there's always a limit to that ability to buffer anything, and someone may be unlucky enough to reach that. But I think the thing that drove me to make this video is just that conversation that I have a lot where it's not just bad luck. There's tangible things that you can control to improve the function of that ankle and to decrease your risk of spraining your ankle or re-spraining your ankle consistently. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that's a little bit of an insight into ankle sprains and ankle rolls. If you have any questions, obviously please let us know in the comments below. If you'd like to support us, it'd be great if you could leave a like down below, and also consider subscribing if you are new. It just helps these videos get out to more people, and hopefully they can help more people as a result. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you soon. Bye.